Good afternoon. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you James A. Middleton, who is the University of Wisconsin School of Education 2001 Alumni Achievement Award winner. Dr. Middleton, or Jim as I know him, received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin Department of Educational Psychology in 1992 and is currently Professor of Engineering and Education at Arizona State and director of the euphonically named Center for Research on Education in Science, Mathematics, Engineering, and Technology, or CRESMET. Jim was selected as a Fulbright Senior Scholar in 2007, has served as the Associate Dean for Research at Arizona State University, and is currently visiting chair and professor of STEM education at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, where his role is to help develop young faculty and improve their scholarship. Indeed, when I was a young scholar, Jim taught me some very important lessons that I still carry with me to this day. That a burro is better than a burrito, both metaphorically and literally. And that adding caramel color to tequila doesn't do anything to improve the flavor, but definitely makes the hangover worse. Since graduating from the University of Wisconsin in 1992, Jim Middleton has become an internationally known leader and scholar in the area of science and mathematics education. He's the author of over 100 articles, chapters, and reports focused particularly on education for linguistically, culturally, ethnically, and economically diverse learners, including, of course, my own favorite article, Triangles and Beyond. Jim is the author of 3 books, the most recent published by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. His research has been done in schools, most of which serve children in poverty under real conditions of implementation. His work explores how increasing teachers' knowledge of mathematics content and their understanding of research on how children learn mathematics can improve their practice. What his work has shown over now almost 2.5 decades of research is that when teachers are given time for this kind of professional development, time to plan, time to put in place new strategies, and can apply their effort over a sustained period of time, they can make a real and positive difference in the mathematical achievement of their students. This work has become the centerpiece of school improvement efforts designed to help teachers promote science and mathematics education for all students. In short, Jim is an alumnus who has embraced the Wisconsin idea in its highest form, combining world-class scholarship with national impact in the classroom. It's an honor and pleasure to introduce a great scholar, a wonderful colleague, and my good friend, Jim Middleton.
All right, let's see. We got a sound check. We're doing okay in the back? Fantastic. Thank you all very much for coming. You see the title of my talk. We're going to talk about education engineering. And I use that word with purpose because I think what we're doing in the educational sciences is we're embracing science a little too much. The detached scholar model, I think, is starting to go away in the sciences even, to where we're starting to embrace real problems of society and trying to utilize scientific method, utilize mathematical models, utilize insights from the humanities in a transdisciplinary manner to try to solve those real problems of education. We're going to talk about that today. Maybe we'll talk about that today. There we go. Okay. I'm still a badger. Can't get it out of you. Can't get it out of you. So a couple years ago, Joan Farini-Mundi, Assistant Director of Education and Human Resources from the National Science Foundation, asked me a number of questions. This was actually a number of questions she asked. We were on a panel together. And so she asked the questions, and I tried to respond, and she responded back. But these are, I think, really fundamental questions. I'll let you take a look at that for just a second. And these are not questions that I have definitive answers for. Okay? They're really tough questions, and I'm going to try to provide some partial solutions, or at least some insights into how we might go about answering some of these questions throughout my talk. But first, I have to give some words of thanks to my colleagues who gave me so much 20 years ago when I graduated. Not all of them are here now. Not all of them are still at the university, but they all deserve a great deal of thanks for from both of the departments where I got most of my major ideas and the learning that have influenced my work over the years. And it's appropriate that we're in the Wisconsin Idea Room because I have a Wisconsin idea. Okay? It came from the ideas of other people, many of whom are sitting in the audience. And it transforms and it changes and it becomes applied in local context. And so really my talk is about this Wisconsin idea. But some additional thanks has to go to my graduate students over the years. When I came to Wisconsin, I was never treated as a student. Okay? I was treated as a colleague with knowledge and skills that I was expected to bring to bear upon a problem that none of us alone could have tackled. And that, to me, was a remarkable change over my undergraduate environment. And I've tried to recapitulate that idea with my own students, to treat them as colleagues, and they come to me with knowledge that I don't have. And the great secret, of course, graduate students, is that when you go to graduate school, your faculty bring you on to learn from you. Okay, remember that. Of course, the people who nominated me for this award, foolishly, I might add. Craig Alberts for shepherding my application. David for shepherding me around. Okay. Interesting, he has the name David. It's kind of appropriate. Ashley for putting up with all the crazy things in my schedule. And each of you for coming to hear me talk. But it's all about the University of Wisconsin as an enterprise. Okay. So here are those questions. Why is the U.S. still in the middle of the pack in international comparisons in mathematics? Poor mathematics teaching is the reason why we have college graduation rates that are so low. Okay. And we all know that the Common Core state standards are the answer. Okay. We know that that's going to solve our problems. I don't even know what an effective mathematics teacher is, let alone figure out what it takes. Or I can know it when I see it, but how do there's so many different varieties. I'm such a wonderful display of craftsmanship in so many classes that I see. It's hard for me to create a set of criteria. Technology, we've got some people that are working on that right here in this room. But when are we going to be able to deliver? That's a tough one. And then the issue of scale, the thing that's always in the back of our minds. I can work miracles with about 40 people. But once we go to one order of magnitude greater than that, to 400, I don't even know what the questions are. I don't even know what the questions are. So we call this a wicked problem, okay? Coming from, it was articulated by Riddle and Weber back in 1973. Horn calls this a social mess. These are some features of wicked problems in bold, and underneath them are the social mess issues. There's no unique correct way to view the problem. Different people looking at the problem will see it differently, and some problems are not seen by all people for a number of different reasons. These problems are connected to other problems in ways that are not always intended and not always understood. Okay? And in fact, when we do understand them, we may not be able to predict them. Okay? The thinking that's involved is often allogical, okay, without logic, or illogical, meaning counter to logic. And the word down at the bottom is Ron Serlin. This is Ron Serlin's first. This is Ron Serlin's first law. Serlin's first law: people are stupid. Actually, this is just a corollary to his first law, which is any idiot can screw up a good thing. And then there's numerous possible intervention points. There's a war we're fighting. What front do you want to fight? And there's multiple fronts. Okay? There's a few more. The consequences of our actions are difficult to imagine, okay? Particularly the power of the unintended. I use unattended as well because there are things we're not even looking at. These problems are primarily stochastic, involving probabilistic kinds of judgments. And those don't add in the same ways as problems that are deterministic. There's great resistance to change. Even from people who want to change, there is resistance because of the inertia of the system. And then there's the issue of the people like me who are out of contact often with the problems and the potential solutions, living outside the realm of those who are the implementers and the end users. In particular, I'm concerned about right now in education, this one right here. This one right here. We're starting to become polarized in the same way that our political climate is polarized, and it's starting to harm education research in general. But I've come to talk about education as a design science in the sense that Bucky Fuller talks about it. I'll let you read this right here because he says it much better than I do. And I'll have a sip of, this is not tequila. What Fuller meant when he talks about this is that humans have a vital need for something. He uses the example of crossing a river. When you have the need to cross a river, you can design a bridge, or I can design a bridge. And if I design a bridge, you can choose to use that bridge and forever abandon the idea of using a ford or trying to swim or some other more perilous method of crossing that river. And so design science is to create that product, to envision that product, to make that product come to pass in such a manner that people will spontaneously abandon their old ways of doing things and will take up new methods of doing things due to this new product that you've designed, new technology that you've designed, a new way of thinking and doing that you have designed. Okay? Speaking of design, this is my take on the design cycle in education R&D, beginning with grounded models. This, I use a euphemism that I'm not going to use here for talking about that, but it's basically deals with your hind end and a hole in the ground. When you don't know the difference between those two, you got to go in and you got to figure out what the heck is going on. It's critical to go in because there's so much that we don't know. Following that, we might develop an artifact. Meg Meyer in the back and I worked together on developing some really fine artifacts, going in and trying to create new mathematics curricula. Okay? And you create some mathematics curricula based upon these things where you've got some, some basic beginning ideas, some what you might call plausible models. And then you create a feasibility study. You go in and you say, okay, let's take a look. Let's create that artifact. Let's see how it works. And you realize it doesn't. Not in the way that you intended. And you have to do some prototyping and trialing. In each phase, iteratively redesigning and redesigning and redesigning and redesigning until finally, somewhere up here, 7 to 10 or 12 stages down the road, you might be able to disseminate something that's of meaning and use to a larger swath of the population than the 40 that you might be working with. Okay? And it turns out that that's exactly the same, as the engineering design cycle as I teach students now in engineering. And it's basically the same thing that Polya figured out back in 1948 when he wrote the fantastic book, How to Solve It, and he reduced it, of course, to 4 steps. He was much smarter than I am. His is a 4-step model. But it's basically the same thing. This is how we solve problems, and this is, in my take, is merely kind of an institutionalized way of thinking about problem solving as opposed to an individual way of thinking about problem solving. But what is engineering? Okay? This is what the National Academy of Engineering might tell you engineering is. Okay? And if you look at that, it's hard for me to say that I can't just take that first word out there and put it in education research. Okay? It's fundamentally what we do when we're trying to create interventions, when we try to test interventions, when we try to understand and improve, we are engaged in the engineering enterprise so that we improve the lives of people. The end goal is this improvement to the lives of people. School achievement, okay, that's not our end goal. Achievement is an index that we might be moving towards this ultimate goal. We have to keep that goal in mind. You might also say it's design under constraint. That's one of the classic definitions of engineering. And certainly in education, we have constraints. And those are the things that are the bugaboos in our R&D efforts when we try to actually make improvements in the education world. So these are some engineering friends of mine and their projects. Engineers is also what engineers do. Engineering is not just something that's defined as a field. It's engineers working with other engineers and other people in the entire enterprise, the support staff. Okay? The end users, the contractors. In a variety of ways, we might think about solar energy to create solar modules that are more than 40% efficient. That's actually a very almost intractable problem. To create biofuels, alcohols, bionics. That's not the future, folks. This is a membrane for helping filter out a dialytic membrane for diabetes patients. This is a blind person taking notes in a lecture hall. This is hooked up to a camera where this limited-sighted person can read what's up on the board as opposed to having to use a monocular with huge magnification. And so it greatly reduces the lag time between between what they see and what they're able to write down, so they can do stuff in real time. This is equity in action right here, and using technology, educational technology, civil engineering, and looking at how to create greener roadways. Some others that we do. This is actually the education enterprise. This is my dean. Okay, is also passing on to the new generation. Engineering is passing on to another generation the skills and the concepts and the mindset and the dispositions of engineers. And we could say the same thing about mathematics students. We can say the same thing about English students. We can say the same thing about all of our education students. And what we're about is trying to improve the lives of others. When you take a look at this photo, these sets of photos, that man right there has a different life now. That little girl lives instead of dies. This woman now is able to handle taking the drugs that are helping her handle her Alzheimer's. Okay? These people have relatives now that are going to live. These kids are learning. We're exploring, and we're dealing with safety. These are the grand challenges that the National Academy of Engineering has laid out. But one of the challenges that the National Academy has laid out is what we call personalized learning. It's one of the 14 top challenges of engineering research to solve in the next century by the National Academy. Personalized learning. And what they mean by that is not individualized learning, but the person in the social context, working with tools, working with each other. It's a really enlightened notion of personalized learning. And there are people in this room, in fact, half the people over on this side of the room that I know are working on those kinds of problems right now. Okay? So this is my basic thesis. We ought to own up to the fact that we are working in engineering. We're iterative, we're empirical, we're pragmatic. Okay? We're theoretical, creating models that we can then transport to new situations and use with some sense of fidelity. And this is important as well. I use this from open source literature. Shareable, modifiable, transportable, and interoperable. Open source software is transforming the way we think about programming, the way we think about design. When we can take others' ideas and use them, we can then modify them. We can take them from one place to another, and other people are able to use them. And then we can combine them in a modular fashion to create new things that we were not even able to think about without this form of idea generation. And so here's my approach. Okay. I try to develop models, okay, of student thinking and of teacher knowledge and other characteristic aspects of education. Okay. I want to utilize those models to create some interventions. Those interventions might be curriculum. They might be the design of new learning environments and technology. They might be new ways of thinking about how to motivate students. It might be teacher practice. It might be professional development. Any of those different types of interventions are viable under an engineering metaphor. And I'm using these models of student thinking and teacher knowledge to create, in my case, professional development curricula and tools and techniques for the improvement of mathematics education. The issue of work is also important. Okay? When we talk about work, it's not perfection. We want to improve something, and so I'm looking for improvement. And if I can improve, I think I'm successful. If I can improve more, I think I'm more successful, so I try to iterate. I try to become more successful over time. And then there's the issue of, how do I know? How do you know? How do we know what we're doing is meaningful? How do you know what we're doing is making a difference as opposed to just creating a set of unintended consequences that might harm students in the long run? And I use a number of different tools to help me think about that. But you have to be data, not data-driven, but you have to utilize data to help you as a positive feedback loop in the system. So I say this is my foci. So it's hard to say can you focus on all those things at once. It's hard to say. These are the things that I'm interested in. These are the things that I work on. These are just examples of engineering in action. But they're not the only thing that you might focus on in teaching, learning, policy, and practice. Okay. And here's how it fits together for me. My work in motivation is tied to my work in ratio and proportion. From those, we want to create curriculum and technologies that are the lever by which we can then impact teachers in professional development, and also a lever by which we can then feed back into the motivation of students and into their ratio and proportion knowledge. Okay, this moves from what I learned at Wisconsin, focus on student thinking. This is the guts of what kids are about in classrooms. They're thinking, they're doing, and we can use thinking in a broader sense than just inside the head. Okay. Their interactions with each other. And then be able to examine the classroom practices that afford and constrain student thinking in a domain, and worry about the teacher knowledges that constrain the classroom practice that move here. But you'll notice that it's not this nice linear fashion. There's feedback loops all through the system, and that's what makes my work so hard. Is trying to understand that system enough to say, really, should I be focusing on this right now? To what extent is the professional knowledge of these teachers, does that matter? In ratio and proportion, how do I really know that the kids are understanding this notion of fractions as an operator, as opposed to just thinking about fractions as a part-whole concept? And right now, everywhere I go, people are talking about this, which has been central to my research for a long time. So I'm going to use that as a central example. One of the problems with motivation is that we start to define it in a lot of different ways. Okay. Motivation is one of those things that it's absolutely necessary. If you use the notion of motivation like force, a motive force in physics, okay? If there's no movement in physics, there's no net force. Is that right? No movement, okay? No change in motion, there's no net force. Okay? And so what we notice motivation as, if you think of it as a force, if there's no movement in students' learning, there's no movement in students' behavior from one thing to another, then there is, if there's no movement, then there's no motive force, there's no motivation, there's no learning taking place in the classic sense of learning content, something important. Okay? And so I boil all of these different definitions down to this: why do we do what we do? I've always been interested in why would anybody in their right mind engage in mathematics lessons in David's teacher's class? Okay? Why would somebody do that? Why would a kid do that? By what justification would a kid in high school pre-calculus, my son's in high school pre-calculus, what justification would we honor from a student who said, yeah, I want to do that, or this makes no sense? Why would anybody in their right mind do that? And I often find it hard to answer that question. Okay? I really find it hard to answer that question, given common practice. Given common practice. And so I've devoted most of my career for trying to periodically going in and dipping my toe into that and try to figure out why would people do what they do. So there's a lot of different theoretical considerations. This is my line of reasoning. And when I came to Wisconsin, I watched some kids doing some stuff in a class, and I went to Bob's class, and I said, hey, Bob, it seems like people tend to do things that they think are fun, right? He said, yep, that's right. And then I went to Rich Lehrer, and I said, I want to study fun. And Rich Lehrer said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I didn't. Okay? I didn't either. So I went in and started to look, and it turns out that there's this notion of intrinsic motivation that's pervasive in the literature, that when people are having fun, they tend to be immersed in the task and doing it just because the task itself is its own reward. Okay? And Dewey talked about that way back in the 20s. We typically present these kind of things as a cost-benefits analysis. problem with a cost-benefits analysis is that people don't actually do that to exhaustion. We tend to choose the first viable alternative we can that comes to mind and engage in that, as opposed to really doing systematic study. So how'd you like to do some differential equations? Okay. See, exactly. Okay. Your past has given you, I'm sorry I put you on the spot, but your past has given you a particular mindset about mathematics, particular calculus, probably calculus-related mathematics. And we tend to classify these kinds of tasks as not very much fun. Okay. And the first thing that comes to mind is not fun, no. Okay. Or how do I avoid this? Or, you know, how are you going to make it worth my while? These are really critical kinds of considerations that kids have all the time. And if that's the first thing that comes to mind, we've lost them, or most of them, at the get-go. Okay. So one of the things that I'm worried about right now is trying to figure out what is that learner thinking and how are they engaged in different tasks. So if they're engaged in one task, how are they classifying that? If they're engaged in another task, how are they classifying that? And how do they use the results of those classifications to create some sort of ready go-to conceptualization of the worthwhileness of mathematics or the worthwhileness of science or other academic pursuits? And here's some good motivational ideas. So there's some aspects of the task that are really critical. That's challenge level, the choices that are given to students, the topic it's based on. There are different biases and aspects of the task that we see all the time. Its usefulness or perceived usefulness, and the different reinforcement contingencies that we place on the task. And there are aspects of the learner that they bring to the task. They got interests. They got plans. They got goals that they bring to the task. Every kid has them. Okay? Are they related to that task? Is the task facilitative of those long-term interests? That's a question we might want to ask. Future time perspective. Some children only see themselves at most 2 weeks into the future. They don't project the future beyond 2 weeks ahead. Okay, how do we get you're going to need this next year. It's not compelling. Now, should we help kids think more longer term? I think so, yes. But should we also make what we do more important and immediate in the moment? Yes, I think we should. Okay. Lots of things here. Their own theories of intelligence. This is Carol Dweck's work, some of the most brilliant work. If you get her book, Mindset, do it, read it, fantastic, brilliant. And those play off each other. So what I'm saying is that there's this interaction between aspects of the tasks and between the learner. And that creates what we call situational interest, the kind of, oh yeah, I might try that. That might be interesting. It increases effort or decreases it depending on which way we're going. It affects persistence. Whether or not people are attributing their successes or failures to internal and stable attributions or to external unstable attributions. It leads to curiosity, the development of immediate goals whereby they can solve a problem. No problem is ever solved without the creation of goals. The use that they make of the mathematics or science, the decisions that all these things are interactions between the task and the learner that are implicated in the design of tasks, the engineering, as it relates to the situation within which that designed intervention is to be applied and realized. Let's see if I can make that work. Okay. In particular, affective response and performance have been something I've been looking at more recently with some colleagues from Australia, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a sec. Some of the empirical work that I worked on early on, worked on this decision-making idea. The nice thing about this is I talked with Tom Carpenter, who's in the audience, and I said, well, I'm thinking about this, and he said, you know, if you want to know what kids think, why don't you just ask them, right? I think he put a caveat on there that was, you might want to do it in some clever way to get good information. Okay? Go in and work with kids, interview those kids, and see what they really think. If you want to know how a kid interacts with a mathematical task, you need to get that kid's perspective. And so I did, and I found that kids desire challenge, but they don't typically get it. Okay? I've not yet seen a kid who wants things to be easy. They want things to be challenging. But they often say, but they do say, you know, yeah, that was easy is good, but they talk about ease as just being able to do something. That seems counterproductive. when ease is just being able to do something, well, how do we then try to reorient our language towards challenge? The fun thing becomes defined as interest. When I say, tell me what's fun, and they list it, boom, 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 those are my interests. Okay? And so we can use this notion of interest. What interests you? And then engage them in tasks that they've previously defined as fun. Okay? Or not in a trivial sense, but in a personally fulfilling sense, and orient in context mathematical activities around them. Okay. This issue of control is also important because the higher the challenge, right? The higher the challenge, we create a task. Often, the less control a student has in terms of their personal ability. Okay? So they have to be able to modulate that challenge to fit their ability. One of the ways to do that is to provide choice of the different task requirements. This is my current model right now. It's in press, where challenge and control are these trade-offs that kids look at, almost like a cost-benefits analysis. And if things have a high enough challenge, a high enough control, you can then start to classify them as a tentative interest. If you're interested in something, believe it or not, you spend more effort on it. I mean, yeah, so Middleton, drab discovery of the obvious. Okay. But if you have interest, you also tend to have more learning goals. You develop more learning goals as opposed to goals for escaping the learning or for just looking good in the task. Okay. And if you have learning goals, those also lead to greater effort. And so right now, and then if tasks are perceived to be very useful, even if they're not an interest necessarily, they become more interesting. And even if they're not quite so interesting, if you perceive that I might be able to use that, this is useful for me, they'll expend more effort. So notice how everything goes through effort. Everything goes through effort. Okay. And so I tell my engineering students right now who are all very worried about their grades, because engineering stuff, like any good pursuit, I say effort wins. Effort wins. Okay. The more effort you put on this, the better you're going to be. It will increase how smart you are. The smarter you are, the better you'll be, the more effort you put in. And you're going to institute a cycle in your own learning. And this is what the research suggests. Okay. And so we get into design. Back in the day, back in '94, when we were doing mathematics in context, we actually used some of these ideas in developing some of the tasks. In this previous slide, I was using some of the mathematics in context, the mathematics in context curriculum, and doing analyzing kids' responses to that and creating that path model. And it turns out that overall, I think we did a pretty good job of being able to modulate challenge and control for those kids. Perfect? No. Useful? Yes. Useful. And then there's Chuck. I always wanted to create a project called Chuck. Okay, where's Chuck Kalish in here? Yep, there you go. Okay. I wanted to create a project called Chuck. This is Children's Understanding of Quotient, where we combined some research on rational number development, which we're still writing up, with some research on motivation, looking at classroom level effects, so that we can start to think about motivation not just as an individual sort of thing in my psychological background, but start to think about, whole classes have personalities, and there are motivational characteristics and norms of classrooms. And some classrooms are more upbeat, some are more down, some are more excited, some are more contemplative. How do we make sense of these things? And so we examined that over a number of years. I've also got a project where we're looking at scale, trying to look at how can we design tasks with really tough mathematics for large numbers of students. And we're analyzing some of the data now. What we're finding is it's very different across the different mathematical domains, that kids really start to classify things that they like. I love algebra, hate geometry, love geometry, hate algebra. Very quickly. They become listed as interests or not interests. And when you do that, there's very different motivational characteristics for high school algebra, typically, than high school geometry. And the kids kind of flip-flop. It's almost as if they're incompatible with each other in the kids' minds. Kind of strange stuff. And then I've got a project with some Australian colleagues, Peter Sullivan and Doug Clark, and Jill Cheeseman and others, where we're looking at persistence and challenge. Can we design challenging tasks? What are the characteristics of challenging tasks? Are there ways in which we can see, can we actually a priori make some judgments about what sort of tasks might be considered challenging by students? And then if we can, how can we encourage persistence, effortful behavior of those students across those challenging tasks? And then what kind of teacher actions seem to encourage these students to persist? And then what are the constraints that teachers experience? Because it's not easy. There's feedback in every system. Okay. And this is what we find. Okay, this is what we find in a lot of classes. So this is norms for an 8th grade, well, a number of 8th grade classes that we look at. This is kind of an epistemic subject in the Piagetian sense applied to a classroom. This is what you see in an 8th grade class. Good tasks that, a task is not everything. The teacher has to construct that task in the minds of the students, even if it's written in an interesting way. It's constructed socially. The participation is motivated by desire to hear ideas, repeated and affirmed by the teachers. The teacher orchestrating the student's motivation in the classroom is critical. Students want to make a unique contribution to the class. This is a social notion of efficacy that we hadn't encountered before. Working with tools. We use a lot of technological tools. I don't know if that's novelty. It's just a novelty effect. But in introducing new technological tools, students liked it. They engaged more. They found it more situationally interesting. They expended more effort, and they achieved more. Now, in 6 or 8 months, maybe that just becomes routine. We have to take a look at that. That's maybe the unintended consequences of introduction of novel tools. Feedback. Knowing what you are doing. Knowing what you are doing. So many kids in mathematics don't know what they're doing. They do it, and they may get good grades. My son has this issue right now. He does it, and he has good grades. And then why? That's just what you do. Okay? This becomes a really critical problem. And so we take all this research, and right now we've got about 10 design specs from an engineering perspective that I would take a look at designing tasks. The nature of the task should be clear. Who wants to know? Who's the audience that I'm creating my response for? David's work right now is actually quite interesting, where students have to write memos to the president of a company or to a supervisor in a company. So who wants to know is actually perfectly clear. I know the audience. Now I can frame my response in a socially appropriate manner. What do I need to know? What's the task? Okay, I've got to design I have to research different methods of dialysis and try to optimize under constraints and say which one I would choose given the different constraints. Brilliant. Okay? And then why? Why? To make people's lives better so that people will live, right? The dialysis situation. In mathematics, it may be another context. It may be urban planning that Meg and I have worked on and other sorts of tasks. That's really critical. The type of thinking you're expected to engage in should be clear. Are we talking about relational thinking? Tom Carpenter's work, okay? Actually, Chuck's work as well, okay? And then also, how do you report it back to the class? What's the form that we're going to, what are the norms for quality mathematical responses? Those should be made clear, okay? Climate encourages risk-taking, challenge. Going out, it's a little beyond what I know, a little beyond what I'm comfortable with. Should be encouraged. Okay. Okay. We know this all the time. About 40 years of research. 40 years of research can be summed up in this statement. Yet we tend to gloss it over and rediscover it periodically. It should be central in our teacher preparation and professional development and just our language around education. This is another one. It's amazing. If you hate what you do, your students will too. Another drab discovery of the obvious, thank you. Okay, again, choices. Choices matter. Time matters. I'm looking at my watch periodically. You see, time matters to you. It matters to students. You need to have adequate time to reflect, adequate time to communicate, adequate time to conjecture, adequate time to wonder. Okay? And that's hard to do in a 43-minute average middle school classroom. Something needs to be done about this because students don't see it. I'm trying. Okay? This is the other one. Regular contract. The more a teacher knows about students, the better they're able to teach. That's something I learned at Wisconsin. And this actually is reflective of a great chapter by Scardamelia and Bearwriter back in 2006 when they talk about knowledge-building communities. It's a wonderful chapter. The idea that students feel a responsibility for the learning of each other in the classroom, and they understand that they have a responsibility that when other students are proffering new solutions, new strategies, that they have a responsibility to learn about those strategies so that they can be able to use them later on if they're viable, or that they can critique them appropriately if they're non-viable. It is a social responsibility in the classroom. These are my top 10. It's the Letterman top 10. And I've done some concurrent work in a lot of things, looking at systemic change. That's my tag. You can't have it. In large, scaling types of situations, it's the relationships among the actors that make the big difference, as I have found. In the Urban Mathematics Collaborative Project, when I was here at Wisconsin, we learned some of those things. Norm Webb and I wrote some early work on that. And working with large systemic efforts in Phoenix, you get the people together and create relationships where they trust each other, where the different gifts that each person brings to the situation are honored and are utilized, not just honored, but utilized, okay? Where people feel that they have a place. Same as it's a self-similar to the way that kids want what kids want in a classroom. And those relationships are sustained even after administration changes. The revolving door administrator is rife in my district, in my area. And administrators change and new administrators come in, but the relationships among those actors, particularly those middle-level managers, the curriculum supervisor, the building level representative, and then they filter down to the teachers. They're brokers that straddling those communities. Those are critical. In Teacher PD, we've got a project that we just finished developing a fourth-year high school curriculum in discrete mathematics and mathematical modeling, right before the Common Core comes out with no discrete mathematics or mathematical modeling in it. So that's going to be interesting to finish up that study, to see what are we going to have any residue? Is there going to be any intellectual residue from this in the next couple of years as those standards, as a political force, make their impact in our state? Who knows? I mean, it's Sterling's first law in action. And then actually doing engineering proper. Working with middle school teachers to get them to think about rate of change, basic notions of calculus in an engineering thermodynamics class. And that's been basically about motivation. These are elementary trained teachers that have poor mathematical backgrounds, smart, great teachers, brave teachers, but scared to death of those things. How do you get them to understand that they are capable? Enthusiasm helps, but trying to apply the same kinds of principles that we found in some of our earlier work with teachers is what we're doing there. And it's been working. It's been working. We've got a nice 2 sigma difference so far with those teachers that related to if they know they can do it, they'll put in the effort. But this is 135 hours. This is tremendous expenditure of time and effort. So there's the cost benefit is also one of those things we haven't looked at. And then we're reforming the engineering curriculum actually at ASU. That's happening across the country, trying to change those freshman experiences, change those sophomore experiences, make them more relevant, engage people in solving real problems from the get-go. Not just fake problems, but real problems to where they might develop a viable product the first year, the second year start to work on refining it, and by the 4th year be able to market that product. Remember the product I showed you with the blind student taking notes? That blind student was one of the engineers on that. He's a senior that won the Intel Innovation Challenge last year for the United States, that particular product. A senior, 22-year-old student with a group of 22-year-old students designing that across a number of different departments in an engineering school. That's education. That's what I'd like to be able to foster more broadly. And then study of professional development and its residue. Barry Sloan and Dan Beatty we're working with a large group of people to take a look at professional development, utilizing wisdom from Tom Carpenter, utilizing wisdom from Megan Franke, I guess my big sister at Wisconsin. She graduated a couple years before me. Her work implementing what we know about children's mathematical thinking and professional development with teachers, helping them in their classrooms develop that, and then watching what happens when the money runs out. That's one of the big questions. So we actually built that into the grant. When the money runs out, what's the intellectual residue that remains? What's the practical change that remains? And we're finding it very difficult right now to see the remains in Phoenix, where we have a 40% teacher attrition rate in this one particular district each year, 40%. So after 2 years, you've got 36% of your original population left. Very difficult to maintain institutional memory under those kinds of conditions. Almost done. So these are the 5 big C's the 6 big C's that I've come up with. And you'll notice that I've got 5 up here. Content matters. Context matters. The problems that we're working with are complex in a real sense, not just a complicatedness sense. They're complex. Those feedback loops make them spiral out of control at times and with unintended consequences. Change is the rule, and we have to begin thinking about the multiple causes and trying to pinpoint causes that are worthy of investment. And I think as a culture, we're not yet to that point where we really understand how those causes interact, because all of these operate as constraints. All of these operate as constraints in our system. And if engineering is working under constraints, then we have to be able to look at these different constraints and the types of constraints that we have in the content. Mathematics is different. It has a different culture, different rules of engagement than science even. The context, for what context are we engaging students in? Are we engaging them in engineering? Are we engaging them in social urban planning? Are we engaging them in economics? What about it? Okay, the complexity of teaching, learning, motivation, policy, how does that interact? Economics. And then how do we even characterize change in those situations? Okay? Okay. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to move. So change is one of the big issues. And I'm going to leave you with just a couple notes. This is what we typically do in education. This is state of the art, what we call alpha change. I've got a scale of measure, okay, whatever your state assessment is. Kids take it time 1, they take it time 2, we subtract the 2, we call that achievement, growth, gain. Well, the problem, of course, is that what happens is that in a few years that test is going to change. And so how do you calibrate from the first test to the second test? This is really it's very difficult when there's a standard error associated with each of those tests. You can't just run a correlation between the two. But what we find is that a lot of the change that we're talking about in knowledge, in system, is what Golumbusky and his colleagues called gamma change. When the actual definition of the problem changes midstream. When the problem changes from one of knowledge to one of social interaction, that's a fundamentally different change. It might be represented by a step function as opposed to a linear function. Okay? We may actually have to create an entire new scale. I'm going to move it just a little bit, sorry. Okay, this is important. We need to create new indices of growth to deal with this problem. Path analysis with a twist. Things like social network analysis, things like structural equations, modeling, help us understand a network of causality as opposed to a single cause and effect model that we really like but never exists. Okay. Oh, there it is. Look at that. Okay. These are the things that we should be investing in our time. Teachers who may or may not be human, okay, or fully human. Okay. Doesn't mean that we should not have human teachers. I am a teacher educator. I will always be a teacher educator. But those teachers have tools, cybernetic tools, that they need to be able to manage and use, and the tool and the teacher and the learner become a system of learning, a system of teaching and learning, and we have to treat them as a system. Okay? Curriculum. We just don't have good models for curriculum. The Carnegie unit is the single worst idea right now in higher education. Right? You guys aren't in K, right? You're not, good.
We're an
And code-free, so are we at ASU. Technology, it's open source, it's developmental. Technology needs to grow with the learner over time. That's something we haven't figured out yet. And we need to change assessment. We really need to change it. Okay. So education engineering. Going back to my original premise, second to last slide. We need to take these things as legitimate design problems and work with each other in an interdisciplinary fashion to tackle those problems, making small inroads and iteratively creating products, ideas, systems, tools, and technologies that work and that then can be grown over time. We need to reattach the ivory tower to its constituents, solving real problems of import at the time, and combine our efforts. Because these are the grand challenges of education. These are the people that we're talking about. It's not the problem that I'm working on right now. It's that we have an end goal. We need to focus on the end goals of teaching and learning, and so that people's lives are improved in the grand scheme. And that's my Wisconsin idea. I'll take any. Are you kidding me? How fast did I talk? Really fast? Yeah, I love this stuff. So, any questions at all? David.
Sure, I have one.
Okay.
So, when you were giving a list of your David Letterman list of 10 things,
yeah,
it struck me that just for background here, we had dinner last night, and I was telling Jim about my daughter's math class, which makes me want to tear my hair out.
Too late.
But it strikes me that many of the things on the list, probably not all of them, but many of the things on the list are the same things that her teacher would say are happening in his classroom. The goals are clear. You know, what it is you have to produce is clear. You have to reproduce the solution I just showed you. Who's it for? Me. And so, so are there some things out of that list of 10 that are sort of the most critical in terms of distinguishing teaching that is of the kind that you're obviously trying to target with that list, and things that are perhaps being done that are necessary for any good teaching, but that by themselves are really not enough to make it good and leave it like what my daughter suffers through every day.
Yeah, I think this is a really tough one. One of the things that I have no idea where the hell I'm at here. All right. I'm not going to worry about it. All right, here's what I'm going to do. The issue is not whether the teacher is clear in their speech. The question is there a common, useful understanding among the members of the classroom of all of these things? Okay. Now, the clarity of, and then the second issue is, to what extent are the goals of the instruction implicated in the way in which those are manifest? So your teacher has particular goals, right? If you want someone to reproduce a particular procedure, one of the best things you can do is to actually explicitly teach that procedure. That's education research as well, right? We know that. The problem, of course, is that, of course, the procedure needs to be one that doesn't have a whole lot of branches. Can't be particularly complicated. It has to have a very explicit goal that is understood at the beginning. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. And if you do that, you can tell people, and they can do it. Human beings can learn from each other that way. The problem, of course, is that in almost every circumstance in mathematics, let's say in high school, families of functions, right? So we have these wonderful things. I call them old friends, because I want people to recognize that old friends change, right? I look a little bit different now than I did back when I was in Wisconsin as a student. My hair is obviously about a foot shorter, and I had a lot more than one or two back then. But so these old friends, these mathematical ideas, are hidden. They look like me now, and the student may not recognize that old friend under the particular conditions of implementation. And explicit instruction is very, very, has historically been very poor at getting kids to be able to do that. So it's a near far transfer issue. If your teacher is interested in far transfer and being able to transport ideas from one situation to another and work at them with fidelity, those goals need to be explicit as well. And if the student understands those goals, and if the teacher understands those goals, I mean, this is also implicated, then I think you'd find a very different manifestation of those goals in practice. And so if our goals, and so I always talk about this with our students, with my students. I say, we start with values. What are the things that we value? Do we hold those values to be common? Are our values for our young students that I work with in the inner city of Phoenix, whose parents are typically immigrants, who are just barely getting by on a couple or 3 jobs, okay, who have to move, by every 2 or 3 months, every 90 days, because they don't have enough money to pay the rent, from one district to another. Are our goals for those children to achieve at the same level as your and my kid, David, where we are advocates, working, and why are you doing that, with the teachers, and say, how can we help? Can I be in the classroom? Providing all the support we can. That's a very different set of circumstances. And if our goals are not to, if our goals are to, for those young children in Phoenix to have the same level of opportunity as your and my kids, then I think we have to really change how we think about all those things. The teaching agent, for example. In some of our school districts, not the one I talked about previously, we have a 40% student attrition rate every year. How do you teach kids who are not there? Okay. Well, you can. I believe you can. But you can't under the current model of the industrial model of teaching. We have to change that. So there's 3 answers to your question. One is that in that classroom, there needs to be shared goals. Okay? And those goals need to be coherent. Second, those goals need to be aligned towards particular values, towards mathematics, and the type of mathematical activity that we would envision in those practices portion of the Common Core standards, which I think are actually more useful than the content listing. And then the third thing is that has to be tied to a larger societal movement of equity and a larger societal movement of excellence, which we forget about in all of our talking. What is excellence? Excellence is high-quality mathematics, high-quality science, opportunities for all of those students to learn it, and then the equity is then equity is put in its proper place. Something that equity without excellence is meaningless, because if we're all bad, then we've all failed.
Thank you. Now I get to do a form. Oh, you want one quick? Is it a quick question? Pardon?
Sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
Thanks, Mitch.
Mitch will catch you later.
He will.
I get to do a formal part of this activity, and that is to actually give Jim a Distinguished Alumni Award. And the formality of that is the formality of that is actually reading a citation, which is descriptive of his work and why we think he merits a Distinguished Alumni Award. So let me do that. As you know, Professor James Middleton is driven by making an impact. He works tirelessly to engage those who are typically underrepresented in mathematics, science, and engineering, and his efforts have ultimately resulted in the improvement of the lives of teachers and students across the nation. Middleton, who received his PhD in educational psychology from the School of Education in 1992, is currently a professor in engineering education and director of the Center for Research on Education in Science, Mathematics, Engineering, and Technology. CRESMAT?
That's it.
At Arizona State University, as well as visiting chair and professor at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Since graduating from UW-Madison, he has become an internationally known leader and scholar in the area of science and mathematics. His research in these areas has become the centerpiece of many school improvement efforts designed to enhance success for all students and to support educators. Selected for a Fulbright Senior Scholar in 2007, Middleton is the author of more than 1,000 articles, chapters.
Not 1,000.
Oh, it's a less order of magnitude than
Yeah,
1,000?
I would go in the, more than 100, but I can't count right now, but it's not 1,000.
You're the mathematician.
Not 1,000, no.
A number of articles.
Oh, there you go. That's
A number of.
This is why she's the dean. Perfect. Thank you.
That's the legal mind. I can
That's
whistle
great.
through the words.
Fantastic.
Articles, chapters, and reports on various topics relating to mathematics. Perhaps the most telling statistic regarding the quality and importance of his work is represented by his success in obtaining external funding to support his research. To date, he has secured more than 26 million.
That's true.
Okay, from a variety of sources, including the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Education. In recognition of his productivity, leadership, and commitment to improving science, mathematics, and engineering education, I'm proud to present James Middleton with the UW-Madison School of Education Distinguished Alumni Achievement Award.
Thank you very much. What time? Okay. Let's see.
You want us to do this again? It's got to go this way.
It's got to go this way, so I'll go like that. There we go. Brilliant. Thank you very much.